Maybe you came here because something inside you is weary, not just a tiredness of the bones, but a deep, persistent exhaustion that follows you even when you lie down to rest. Perhaps you are currently feeling as though your life is a carefully woven tapestry, and you have spent the entire day, and perhaps many days before this, frantically pulling at the loose threads on the surface, terrified that if anyone saw the knots and the tangled mess underneath, they would see that you are not as put together as you have been pretending to be. Right now, the room is quiet, but your mind is still pacing, still checking the pattern for imperfections, still worrying that if you stop managing the surface for even a moment, the whole thing will come undone. You are safe here, dear friend. There is no one in this room asking for a performance. You do not need to show anyone the front of your rug, and you do not need to hide the underside. The blanket is heavy and warm across your legs, grounding you in the stillness of the night. Notice how the light in your room is dim, perhaps a soft blue-toned moonlight spilling across the floorboards. The air feels cool and clean against your face, and your pillow is ready to hold the weight of your head. You can let the tension in your shoulders dissolve. You can let your jaw unhinge. There is nothing left to curate. There is no audience waiting for a smile or a sign of strength. You have arrived here, in this quiet, unobserved space, and arriving is enough. You are not broken. What you are feeling is not a failure of character, nor is it a sign that you are living your life incorrectly. It is simply the weight of trying to present a perfect surface to a world that is inherently messy. Tonight, we will not force your mind to be silent. We will not try to smooth over the knots or pretend the tangles do not exist. Instead, we will learn how to hold them differently. We will learn that the beauty of a woven life is not in the absence of knots, but in the strength they provide to the whole pattern. Right now, maybe you have felt this too, that strange, heavy paradox, where the harder you try to be okay for the sake of others, the more hollow and unseen you feel inside. We often think that if we could just hide the messy parts, if we could just be enough, we would finally feel loved and secure. But the insight we are leaning into tonight is this: you are not suffering because you are messy. You are suffering because you believe the messiness must be hidden. The piece of wisdom that might help you breathe a little easier is that peace is not found in maintaining a flawless surface. It is found in the radical acceptance that the underside of your life, the knots, the tangles, the parts you hide, is the very foundation that holds your story together. If it feels right, take a slow breath. Let it fill your lungs, and as you exhale, imagine you are letting go of the need to be a finished, perfect product. You do not need to solve your whole life tonight. You do not need to figure out how to be more competent, more collected, or more put together by morning. All of that can wait. You are safe enough to soften. You are safe enough to let the threads of your day become tangled for a few hours. Nothing is required of you right now. No one is watching. You are allowed to be incomplete. You might notice a thought drift by perhaps a flicker of anxiety about tomorrow or a regret about something you said or left unsaid. Do not try to push it away, and do not try to fix it. Just acknowledge it as you would a loose thread on a rug. It is there, it is part of the weave, but it is not the whole pattern. You are the weaver, not the thread. When you remember this, you can look at your own imperfections with a different quality of attention, not with the sharp, judging gaze of a critic, but with the quiet, observant eye of someone who knows that every knot is a place where you held on when things were difficult. We are going to explore this together. We are going to look at the way you have been hiding the underside of your life, and we are going to see what happens when you finally stop flipping the rug over in a panic. You have been carrying so much, and your hands are tired. You deserve this space. You deserve to rest without having to justify your worth. The world outside will keep spinning, the sun will find its way back to the horizon, and you will be there to meet it. not because you spent the night fixing everything, but because you finally gave yourself the permission to be whole in all your messy, beautiful complexity. Take another slow breath, letting it settle into your belly. Feel your body becoming heavier, sinking into the mattress. You are resting on a foundation that does not judge you. You are held by a silence that does not demand an explanation. You can let the performance end. The lights are dim, the stage is empty, and you are finally free to be exactly who you are, without an audience, without a mask, and without the need to be anything other than a person in need of a good, deep, restorative rest. In a moment, we will begin to look at the first story, a story about a monk who was so terrified of a single loose thread that he almost forgot to weave the pattern at all. But for now, just drift. Let the rhythm of the night be the only thing that guides you. You have done enough. You have arrived and you are safe. In a quiet valley where the mountain fog settles like a soft woolen blanket over the temple roof, there lived a young monk named Kale. Kale was a weaver. He was tasked with the most delicate work in the monastery, creating the large, ornate tapestries that hung in the grand hall, telling the history of the temple's lineage. Kale was talented, but he was also a man living in the shadow of a secret exhaustion. He spent his days at the loom, his hands flying across the threads, ensuring that the front of the tapestry was flawless, vivid, and magnificent. Every color had to be perfect. Every image had to be precise. He knew that the monks and the villagers who visited the hall would stop to admire his work, and he lived for that moment of recognition, the nod of approval, the whispered praise, the feeling that he was at last a person of value. But Kale's secret was the underside of his rug. Behind the beautiful, seamless surface, the back of the tapestry was a chaotic web of knots, frayed ends, and tangled threads. It was a mess of corrections, of places where the thread had snapped, and places where he had tied awkward, bulky knots just to keep the pattern from unraveling. To Kale, this backside was a source of mounting terror. He believed that if anyone ever saw the underside of his work, they would see the real Kale. The Kale who struggled, the Kale who made mistakes, the Kale who was not nearly as composed as he appeared. He became obsessed with hiding it. He would work late into the night, using a small, sharp, bone-weaving needle to try and flatten the knots, to tuck away the frayed edges, and to trim the dangling threads until his fingers were bruised and aching. He lived in fear of a sudden breeze that might flip the rug, or a curious visitor who might peek behind the frame. He was so busy managing the hidden mess that he stopped feeling the joy of the weave itself. He was performing competence while his heart felt like it was fraying at the edges. One afternoon, when the light in the loom room was thin and pale, an old weaver from the high mountain passes arrived at the temple. She was blind, yet she was known for creating tapestries that people said felt like home. She didn't use a loom. She wove on a simple frame, and she spent as much time touching the back of her work as she did the front. She sat down beside Kale, who was currently wrestling with a particularly stubborn knot on the underside of his tapestry, his face drawn tight with the effort of concealment. She reached out, her fingers dancing over the surface of Kale's rug. She didn't stop at the beautiful colors of the front. She leaned over, and with a surprisingly strong movement, she flipped the corner of the rug over, revealing the tangled, knotted backside to the light. Kale felt his heart stop. He reached out to flip it back, his voice thick with panic, but she placed a hand firmly on his wrist. "Tell me, young weaver," she said, her voice dry and kind, "what are you trying to hide here?" "It is the mess," Kale whispered, unable to look at her. "It is where the thread broke, to keep the pattern clean. If anyone sees this, they will know I am not a master. They will see that the work is just a lie." The old woman let go of his wrist and ran her thumb over one of the largest, bulkiest knots. She felt the texture of it, the roughness of the tension. "And this knot," she asked, "was this here because you were lazy, or because you were holding on when the thread wanted to snap. Cale was silent. He looked at the knot. He remembered that particular section of the tapestry. He had been so tired that day, so afraid that he would lose his place in the lineage, that he had cried as he worked. He had tied that knot with shaking hands, desperate to keep the pattern going, desperate to stay in the weave. "It was a hard day," he said, his voice barely audible. "The thread was weak. I didn't want the whole thing to come apart." The old woman smiled, a slow, gentle expression that seemed to reach the very corners of her eyes. "This knot is not a failure," she said. "It is the history of your struggle. It is the place where you chose to stay, where you chose to keep going when things were falling apart. You are trying to hide the very things that give the rug its strength. Do you think the surface can hold its color if there is no foundation to hold it together? You are spending your life trying to shave away the strength of your own work, all because you are afraid of being seen as human." Cale looked at the bone needle in his hand, the sharp, dangerous tool he used to punish himself for his own humanity. He looked at the frayed threads he had been trying to erase. For the first time, he didn't see mistakes. He saw the resilience of the weave. He saw that the knots were not the problem. The problem was the performance. The problem was his belief that the tapestry had to be perfect on both sides, and that his worth depended on the deception of a flawless surface. The old weaver picked up a strand of silk. She did not try to fix the knot. She simply tied it into the pattern, making it part of the design, a subtle textured accent that added a new depth to the weave. She showed him how the mess could actually be integrated, how the struggle could be allowed to exist as part of the structure, rather than a secret to be buried. Cale felt a sudden, profound collapse of his own resistance. He realized that the exhaustion he had been feeling for years was not the result of the weaving, it was the result of the hiding. He sat back on his heels, the loom room suddenly feeling less like a cage and more like a sanctuary. He didn't have to be a master, he just had to be a weaver. And for the first time in his life, he let his shoulders drop. He let the bone needle lie on the floor, untouched. As he looked at the underside of his rug, the knots, the tangles, the history of his own tired, honest, beautiful effort. It wasn't perfect, it was human. And as the sun began to dip below the mountain ridge, Cale felt, for the very first time, that he might finally be enough. In a moment, we will look at how this struggle, the one you feel when you are frantically pulling at the loose threads of your own life, is exactly what has been keeping you from the rest you deserve. We will see why the performance of being okay is so much heavier than the reality of being whole. But for now, just notice the knot in your own chest. Notice the place where you have been holding on, and see if, just for a moment, you can allow it to be there, without the need to hide it, without the need to fix it, and without the need to be anything other than exactly who you are in this quiet, unobserved, and perfectly human moment of rest. This story is not suggesting that the work of our lives is meaningless, nor is it asking us to stop caring about the patterns we weave or the responsibilities we carry. If you have been living your life with a sense of frantic responsibility, feeling that if you were to loosen your grip on your own internal loom, if you were to stop smoothing the surface or hiding the knots, everything would fall into a disarray you could not survive. This story is not asking you to become cold, distant, or indifferent. It is not asking you to abandon your commitments or stop trying to be a person of value. It is showing us something much quieter and perhaps much more radical. It is showing us that the exhaustion you feel is not caused by the pattern of your life, but by the desperate energy you expend trying to keep the underside hidden. When Cale was in that loom room, he was not just weaving history, he was performing a version of himself. He was trying to enforce a kind of permanent, seamless perfection on a piece of work that was by its very nature composed of individual, fragile threads that would inevitably break and require knotting. We often do the same thing in our own lives. We have our own versions of that sharp, bone-weaving needle. Perhaps yours is the constant mental rehearsal of a conversation that hasn't happened yet, trying to position your words so they will appear flawless. Perhaps it is the midnight inventory of your own failures, trying to justify why you have knots in your weave that no one else seems to have. We carry these needles because we believe they are the only things standing between us and the revelation of our own inadequacy. We believe that if we stop trimming the threads, if we stop flattening the knots, we are somehow failing our duty to be perfect. But the Buddhist perspective suggests something very different. It teaches us that the first pain, the snapped thread, the unexpected transition, the difficult emotion, the moment where the pattern doesn't look the way we intended, is a natural part of being alive. It is the inevitable movement of the seasons of our human experience. We cannot always control the first pain. We cannot always stop the thread from snapping. And we cannot always stop life from presenting us with challenges we didn't ask for. But the second pain, the one that really wears us down, the one that makes the loom feel like a cage, is the one we add ourselves. It is the judgment we layer on top of our experience. It is the story we tell ourselves that says, "This shouldn't be happening," or "I am a failure because my life has knots in it." That second wound, the one born of our resistance to our own humanity, is the one that bleeds. Think of how often you have felt that internal friction. You feel tired, and immediately you judge yourself for being a person who gets tired. You feel confused, and immediately you worry about the fact that your pattern is not clear. You want to be at peace, but you are so busy measuring your level of peace against a standard of flawlessness that you never actually allow yourself to experience the quiet strength of the foundation you have built. This is the act of being the performer instead of the weaver. By trying to force the rug of your life into a rigid, static display of perfection, you are missing the beauty of the knots that have actually kept you together during your hardest seasons. You are exhausted because you are fighting your own history, and your history is a much larger force than your own need for approval. This is not a call to surrender your life to chaos. It is an invitation to meet your life with a different kind of awareness. In the ancient teachings, this is often described as accepting the truth of the present, but you can think of it as the way of the weaver. When the old woman spoke to Kale, she wasn't telling him to leave his work to ruin. She was showing him that the tapestry is already a reflection of his journey. The knots in the back are not evidence of his incompetence. They are the evidence of his survival. When you stop treating your own inner transitions, the times when you feel messy, confused, or entirely unobserved, as if they were evidence that you are failing, you finally give yourself room to breathe. You do not need to solve your whole life tonight. You do not need to understand why the pattern of your life feels so complicated, or why the season of your life feels like it is fraying at the edges. You only need to notice that you are fighting the weave. If you can simply notice the tightness in your chest, or the habit of your mind to lean forward into the opinion of an audience that isn't even there, you have already started to put down the bone needle. You don't have to throw it away in a grand gesture. You can just let it rest on the loom for a moment. You can see it for what it is, a tool you once thought you needed to stay safe, but which is now only serving to hurt your own hands. There is a profound comfort in realizing that you are not the one who has to hold the entire pattern together for the approval of others. The world will keep turning whether or not you have solved every knot in your mind tonight. The stars do not ask for your permission to move across the sky, and they certainly do not judge the rug you are weaving. Your heart beats and your lungs fill with air without you having to manage the process or seek a nod of recognition from your own thoughts. There is a deep, quiet intelligence flowing through you. a rhythm that was here long before you started worrying about your public-facing self, and it will be here long after the current anxieties have passed. When we align ourselves with this rhythm, when we stop trying to dictate how the world perceives our tapestry, we don't become less effective or less caring. We become more present. We become more capable of responding to what is actually happening, rather than what we are afraid might happen. You might be worried that if you stop trying to flatten the knots, you will lose your shape. But notice the difference between being structured and being suffocated. When you weave with honesty, you allow the threads to follow their natural tension. You provide support for the weak spots. You observe the growth of the pattern. But you do not pull at the threads until they snap just to make the rug look flatter. Caring for your life is an act of love and attention. Hiding your knots is an act of fear. What we are learning tonight is how to shift from fear-based concealment to love-based inclusion. And that shift begins right here, in the quiet of this room, as you let the weight of your body sink deeper into the support of your bed. You are allowed to be tired. You are allowed to be in the middle of a transition where you feel messy. You are allowed to not have the answers yet. You are not required to be a finished product. You are a work in progress, a tapestry that is still being woven, and there is immense beauty in the places where the knots are tied, because that is exactly where the strength of your own story resides. If you feel the pull to start managing the surface again, to start picking up that bone needle and flattening the knots, simply observe that pull. Notice it without judgment. You don't have to scold yourself for having a mind that wants to be seen as perfect, that is just a habit it learned long ago to try to keep you safe. You can thank your mind for its vigilance, and then gently remind it that for tonight, the work is done. You can let the thoughts be there, like shadows on the wall, without having to follow them. They are not orders, they are not the truth. They are just thoughts, passing through the vast, clear sky of your awareness. In the next moment, we will look at how to bring this realization into your body, to help you soften that inner resistance that has been keeping you awake. We will move away from the effort of managing your perceived surface and move toward the ease of simply resting within the wholeness of the pattern. You are safe enough to let go. You have done enough for today. The world will hold itself for a few hours. And you, dear friend, have earned the right to drift in the quiet, undisturbed by the need to be anything other than exactly who you are, right here, in this breath. If you are willing, let us move from the loom room and the history of Kel's tapestry into the quiet space of your own body, not as an exercise of discipline, but as a gentle experiment in release. There is no need to change your posture, no need to sit, no need to perform any version of stillness. You are already exactly where you are meant to be. Let your breath become the only guide you follow. Do not force it to be deep or slow. Just let it move at its own natural pace, like the rising and falling of the tide. As you breathe, notice the physical sensation of the air moving past your lips, cool and light. And then, as you exhale, feel the way your chest sinks just a little bit closer to the comfort of your bed. Imagine now that your mind is that grand hall of the monastery, and your thoughts are the intricate, woven threads you have been obsessively managing for the eyes of others. For so long, you have held the bone needle high, trying to ensure the surface of your life appears flawless, trying to tuck away the frayed edges so that you appear worthy of respect. But for these next few moments, we are going to set that heavy, ornate rug down on the cool stones of the present. We are going to let the rug be, and we are going to walk, just for a moment, on the bare, unadorned floor. If it feels right, bring to your awareness a single recurring thought that has been asking for your attention tonight. It might be a worry about how you are perceived by your colleagues, a fear that you are falling behind in your responsibilities, or a persistent nagging need to prove your value to someone who may not even be watching. You do not need to analyze it. You do not need to fix it or argue with it. Just let it appear in your mind's eye, like a tangled knot on the underside of a tapestry sitting there in your open hands. Look at that knot. Notice the texture of the thread, the way you have spent so much energy trying to flatten it, the way you have worried about the pattern it might create on the other side. You have been carrying this performance for a long time, thinking that by hiding these knots, you were ensuring your place in the world. But notice the tension in your fingers as you grip that invisible needle. Notice how your arm, your shoulder, and even your neck have tightened in response to this small, simple struggle. You are not only carrying the weight of the knot, you are carrying the entire weight of your own fear that without the perfect surface, you would be seen as flawed. Now, imagine that you are sitting beside that mountain loom and you reach out to set the needle down on the table beside you. You do not have to throw it away. You do not have to break it. Just let it rest on the wood. When you release your grip, feel the instant change in your muscles. Feel the way your hand, finally free of the burden, begins to relax. The knot is still there, the thought, the need for validation, the worry about being seen, but it is no longer being pulled taut by your fingers. It is resting on the loom, and the loom is perfectly capable of holding it. If your mind immediately reaches out to pick the needle back up, if the habit of hiding the underside is so strong that you find yourself grasping for it again, do not be hard on yourself. That is not a failure. That is just your mind's way of trying to protect you from the fear of being seen. Acknowledge the reflex. Say to yourself with kindness, I see you trying to keep me safe by keeping the pattern clean. And then, with the same gentle patience you would show a tired child, invite your hand to open once more. Let the needle rest. You are not abandoning your life. You are simply allowing your life to exist without the need for you to be its constant, frantic curator. Notice what happens when you stop managing the surface for an audience. Does the rug fall apart? Does the structure of your life crumble into dust? Or does the space around you simply become a little more honest, a little more human? You might find that the knot, no longer fed by your desperate need to hide it, begins to lose its sharp, demanding tension. It might start to look less like a sign of failure and more like a testament to the fact that you have lived, that you have struggled, and that you have held on when things were difficult. Perhaps you feel the urge to check the weave, to make sure no one is looking at the back. You can let that urge come and go, like the wind moving through the mountain pines. You don't have to follow the wind. You don't have to explain your process to the shadows. You can just remain here, in the space between the thoughts, where there is nothing to prove and nowhere else you need to be. If you find that your breathing has become shallow, simply invite a bit more room into your ribs. Let the exhale be long and slow, a way of signaling to your nervous system that you are safe enough to stop bracing for the gaze of others. You have spent so much energy being a performer, and it is a tremendous release to finally remember what it feels like to just be a weaver on the path. The weaver does not try to impress the thread. The weaver simply works with what is there, and in working, finds their own rhythm. There may be parts of your life that feel frayed, or tangled, or messy. That is the nature of a tapestry that is actually in use. If you try to force it to be a museum piece that never touches the ground, you will only end up exhausted, and you will never see the beauty of the pattern that is actually emerging through your daily efforts. But if you stop fighting the reality of your current, unobserved struggles, you might notice that there is a different kind of strength here, a deeper, more ancient intelligence that knows exactly how to bind the threads, with or without the applause of anyone else. You do not need to have a strategy for your worth tonight. You do not need to understand why the pattern has become complicated or how you will eventually be perfect again. Those answers will arrive in their own time, in their own way, and they will be far clearer if they come to you, while you are rested, rather than while you are spiraling in a storm of performance. For now, the only thing that matters is the weight of your body against the mattress, the rhythm of your heart, and the quiet permission you are giving yourself to let go of the sharp bone needle. If a new thought arises, treat it like a loose thread drifting onto the loom. You see it, you acknowledge it, and then you let the breath carry it wherever it needs to go. You do not have to trim it away. You do not have to gather it into a pile for inspection. You can just let it be. This practice of observing without gripping is a muscle, and like any muscle, it grows stronger with rest. You are not doing this to achieve some state of perfect invulnerability. You are doing this to become a better companion to your own experience. You are learning to sit at your own loom, surrounded by the history of your life. And finally, for the first time in a long time, you are finding that you can be at peace even when the underside is messy, even when the knots are visible, and even when you have no one to prove anything to. Take a few moments now to just feel the relief of this, the utter lack of demand. There is no one here asking you to be more than you are. There is no one here checking your weave for errors. You are not a tapestry that must be flawless to be beautiful. You are a person, and you are worthy of rest just because you exist. The monastery will sleep tonight. The pines will continue to sway. The night will continue its cycle, and you can just breathe. You can just be, and if you find yourself drifting away into sleep, that is the best possible outcome. You do not need to stay awake to be wise. Your subconscious understands this wisdom even when your conscious mind is quiet. Let the words dissolve into the background. Let the practice settle into the marrow of your bones. You are doing exactly what you need to do. You are letting go, and in the letting go, you are finding the very safety you have been chasing for so long. If you feel your mind begin to pull back toward the needle, toward the need to be perfect, just feel the weight of your body again. Anchor yourself in the physical sensation of being here. The room is safe. The bed is warm. The night is quiet. You have already done enough for today. The rest can wait. The opinions can wait. The pattern is already yours, knots and all, and you are finally free to close your eyes. In the high, dry reaches of a mountain pass, where the wind perpetually carries the scent of pine and distant snow, there lived a merchant named Elian. He was a man whose entire life was governed by the rug. He carried a massive, intricate tapestry he had spent a decade gathering from the finest looms in the empire. It was his most prized possession, a work of art he displayed whenever he reached a new marketplace. The front of this rug was a masterpiece of vibrant blues and deep sunset golds, depicting a scene of serene mountains and calm lakes. When he unrolled it, people would gather, offer him coins for a glimpse, and whisper about the grace and stability of the man who owned such a treasure. But Elian lived in constant, hidden terror. He knew that the underside of his rug was a disaster of frayed silk, knotted repairs, and tangled cords from where he had hastily mended it during his most desperate years of travel. He was terrified that someone one day would be clumsy enough to flip a corner or catch a gust of wind, revealing the messy, knotted foundation of his life. He spent every night alone in his tent, frantically stitching at the back with a frayed, mud-stained silk cord he kept in his tunic, trying to smooth out the bulges so the rug would appear perfectly flat. He was exhausted. He was anxious. He was so terrified of being seen as the man who struggled that he could no longer bear to look at the beautiful scene on the front. It had become a burden, a heavy, secret shame he hauled from city to city. One evening, caught in a sudden violent rainstorm that threatened to wash his caravan off the mountain ridge, Elian sought shelter in the cave of an old, reclusive weaver. The cave was lit by a single low-burning fire, and the weaver, a woman with hands so scarred they looked like map lines of a rough terrain, was busy tending to a pile of damp, unusable wool. Elian, drenched and trembling, clutched his rug to his chest as if it were a shield. He begged for space to wait out the storm, his eyes constantly darting to the corner, checking to ensure the rug remained tightly bundled, its underside safely hidden from view. The weaver watched him for a long time. She did not ask him to sit. She did not ask him to speak. She simply observed the way he clutched the bundle, the way his knuckles were white, with the strain of keeping the secrets of his rug from being exposed to the damp, cold air of the mountain cave. Finally, she stood up, walked over to where he stood and without a word, reached out and took the rug from his arms. Elian gasped, reaching for it, but she was stronger than she looked. She walked to the center of the cave, turned her back to the fire, and with a single sweeping motion, she threw the rug onto the flat stone floor, unrolling it completely. But she did not unroll it to show the mountain scene. She unrolled it so the back faced upward, exposing the messy, knotted and tangled underside to the dim light of the fire. Elian cried out, covering his face with his hands. He expected the weaver to laugh. He expected her to point at the failures, the frayed cords, and the ugly, bulky knots he had tied when he was starving, when he was alone, and when he was losing his way. He waited for the judgment, the moment where he would finally be revealed as the fraud he feared he was. But the weaver did not laugh. She knelt beside the rug, and she began to trace the line of a particularly large, uneven knot with her rough, calloused finger. "This knot here," she said, her voice quiet and steady against the howling wind outside. "Tell me what it cost you to tie it." Elian dropped his hands. He looked at the knot. It was a dark, thick piece of cord, knotted tightly, where he had once been robbed of his supplies in a winter blizzard. "I was afraid," he whispered. "I didn't think I would make it through the month. I had to knot the thread to keep the pattern from unraveling when the wind was against me." The weaver nodded and moved her hand to another knot, a frayed, messy section from when he had been sick and could barely see the loom, and this one. "That was when I wanted to give up," Elian said, his heart beginning to beat with a strange new rhythm. "I didn't have the strength to make it neat. I just needed to survive." The weaver looked up at him, her eyes bright in the firelight. "You have spent your life trying to hide these things," she said. "You think the rug is beautiful only because of the gold and the blue on the front. But the rug is durable because of these knots. The surface is just a dream of calm. The back is the reality of your life. It is the truth of how you survived. Why are you so angry at the threads that held you together when you were at your breaking point?" Elian stood there in the silence of the cave. He looked at the underside of his life, the knots he had made while he was struggling, the messy repairs he had made while he was broken, and the frayed edges he had made while he was learning. For years, he had been trying to hide the truth of his own survival, treating his resilience like a defect. He had been trying to perform a masterpiece, while his heart was exhausted by the act of pretending he had never been in the blizzard. He walked over to the rug. He did not flip it back over. He knelt down, and for the first time, he touched the back of the rug with his own hands. He felt the roughness, the uneven tension, and the history written in the cord. He didn't feel shame anymore. He felt for the first time a sense of relief so profound. It felt like breath returning to his lungs. He realized that he had been holding his breath for a decade, waiting for the rug to be flipped, and now that it had happened, the world had not ended. He was still here. He was still himself. And he was, in fact, more than he had ever been before. He did not become a man who never had knots again. He was still a merchant. And he was still a man with a past that was not always tidy. But he changed in a small, quiet way. The next morning, when the storm had passed, he did not bundle the rug back up to hide the back. He folded it carefully, knowing that the knots were there, and he walked back down the mountain. When he reached the marketplace, he did not unroll the rug to show the mountain scene to the curious crowds. He left it rolled, and he sat in the shade, talking to other travelers about the road. He found that he didn't need the validation of the audience to feel the rug was his own. He knew what was underneath, and for the first time, that was enough. He had learned that the performance was the real burden. The knots were not the problem. The problem was the belief that he had to be perfect to be loved. You are doing the same thing. You are holding your rug so tightly, terrified of the knots. When the knots are the very things that make your life, your story, and your presence in this world real. You have been trying to trim the history out of your own life, but the history is what gives you your texture. It is what makes you, you. And you are allowed to be knotted, you are allowed to be frayed, and you are allowed to stop painting for an audience that will never truly see the back of the rug anyway. You are safe enough to be messy, you are safe enough to be human, and you are safe enough to finally set down the bone needle and rest. When we peel back the layers of the performance, the need to keep the surface of our lives looking seamless and orderly, we often uncover the true engine of our exhaustion, a profound underlying terror that if we were to show the knotted underside of our history, we would be found wanting. We operate under the assumption that our worth is something we must constantly re-verify, and that this verification can only come from the outside, from the eyes of others. This is the mechanism that generates our most persistent suffering. We become like a person holding a rug with both hands, muscles trembling with the strain of keeping the frayed edges tucked away, believing that if we let go, our true messy self will be revealed and we will be abandoned. This cycle of bracing against reality is what Buddhist wisdom calls the second wound. The first wound is the inherent difficulty of being alive. It is the reality of the loose threads, the moments where we fall short, the times where life doesn't match the design we imagined, the grief, the frustration, the simple, honest reality of struggle. That is the first wound, and it is unavoidable. It is simply the nature of existence. But the second wound, the one that keeps us awake and restless, is the one we inflict upon ourselves by insisting that our reality should be different. It is the voice that says this shouldn't be happening, or if I were better, I wouldn't have these knots. By fighting against the very evidence of our humanity, we turn an ordinary challenge into a source of deep internal conflict. Consider how you have turned your own past into a source of shame. You might look at a difficult chapter of your life and see only the failure, only the places where you struggled or felt lost. You fixate on those moments, replaying them with the sharp, cold light of self-criticism, trying to reweave them into something that doesn't look so human. But in doing so, you are not healing the past, you are keeping it alive. You are making your pain your identity. You are convincing yourself that you are the mess, rather than the person who is weaving through it. When you hold on to your past as a weapon to use against your present, you are essentially trying to weave with a needle that has no eye. You are working hard, but you are not moving forward. This fear of uncertainty, the fear that if you don't control every thread, you will lose your way, is just another version of the performance. We rehearse the future not to be prepared, but to be safe from the feeling of not knowing. We think that if we can simulate every outcome in our minds, we won't have to face the vulnerability of the unknown. But the future is not a pattern you can pre-design. It is a space that opens only as you walk into it. When you treat uncertainty as an enemy to be defeated through overthinking, you exhaust the very mind that is supposed to be your guide. Peace is not the absence of the unknown. It is the presence of a deep, more rooted trust in your ability to meet whatever arises. Buddhist wisdom suggests that we can learn to meet the first wound without adding the second. This doesn't mean we become cold or indifferent. It doesn't mean we stop trying to improve our lives or that we stop caring about our impact. It means we stop using self-judgment as a tool for change. Imagine that you are holding a piece of thread that is knotted and tangled. If you pull at it with frantic, angry energy, you only make the knot tighter. But if you hold it with patience, if you feel where the tension is and gently work to loosen the knots, the knot eventually yields. This is compassion. It is the ability to look at your own knots, your anxiety, your fear of being seen, your history of struggle, and to say, "This is not a flaw. This is where I held on when the wind was strong." When you stop trying to fix your inherent worth through the mechanism of shame, the performance naturally begins to collapse, not as a tragedy, but as a long-awaited release. You are not a broken tapestry that needs to be discarded. You are a person, a weave of light and shadow, of perfect days and complicated nights. You are learning to distinguish between the human need for connection and the ego's demand for approval. Connection is a warm, mutual sharing of our humanity. Approval is a transaction, a way of trading your own truth for a moment of perceived safety. When you are steady in your own light, you don't need the transaction anymore. You are free to be vulnerable, to be messy, and to let the pattern of your life be what it is. Notice the relief in that. You can finally stop trying to hide the underside of your life from your own eyes. You can stop looking at your own imperfections as evidence of failure and start seeing them as the evidence of your life force. As you soften into this realization, the internal monitor, that tired, vigilant eye that has been watching your performance for so long, begins to grow dim. You can invite it to rest. You can tell it, "I appreciate your effort, but I am safe. I am the weaver, and I have the strength to hold the pattern." This is the integration of the teaching. It is not about becoming a person who never feels the desire for validation. It is about becoming a person who no longer gives that desire the power to define their reality. You are learning that the rug of your life is beautiful, not because it is flat, but because it is durable. It has endured. It has been tied and retied, and it is still, in this very moment, holding you. As you lie here, feel the space that has opened up in your mind. The demand for perfection, the pressure to be perceived as together, the fear that you are failing, these are just echoes of a stage you are no longer required to stand on. You can step down. You can let the audience fade. You can return to your own life, your own breath, your own quiet weave, and find that it was always enough. The room is quiet. The air is still, and you are finally, quietly, stepping out of the role of the performer into the deep restorative rest of just being yourself. You don't have to solve your whole life tonight. You don't have to have the answers for the coming weeks. You don't have to ensure the pattern is clear. You are safe, you are held, and you are being invited to rest. Not because you have earned it by fixing everything, but because you are finally willing to stop running from the reality of where you stand. There is a deep, abiding intelligence in your own heart that knows how to navigate the knots, and it is most accessible when you stop trying to force the thread to be anything other than what it is. Rest now into that realization, and feel how much lighter the air becomes when you stop trying to curate the shadows for someone else. There is nothing left for you to manage. The loom is at peace, and you are finally free. It is one thing to find this stillness here, in the sanctuary of your room, under the heavy comfort of a blanket, where the world is quiet and the light is soft. It is quite another thing to carry this wisdom into the noise of your Tuesday afternoon, or the frantic pulse of a Sunday evening, when the weight of the coming week begins to gather like storm clouds in the distance. You might wonder how a lesson about ancient looms and hidden knots applies to the ping of a notification, the tightness in your chest when you feel behind in your work, or the quiet, persistent ache of comparing your own messy internal weave to the polished surfaces of everyone else's existence. But this is exactly where the practice lives. Peace is not meant to be a destination you visit for a few hours in the dark. It is a way of walking through the day. Think of the small, almost invisible moments when you feel that heavy bone needle of anxiety reaching for your hand, begging you to trim a loose thread so the world won't see your struggle. Perhaps it is when you send a message to someone you care about, and the minutes tick by without a reply. You can feel the mind start to spiral, can't you? You start to invent stories about why they haven't answered, or you begin to rehearse what you might say if they don't, or you feel the sharp, familiar sting of rejection before anything has even happened. In that moment, you are holding the needle of that worry, gripping it so tightly your knuckles are white. What would happen if, instead of following that story, you simply noticed the sensation of the grip? You don't have to ignore the fact that you feel anxious. You don't have to pretend you don't care. You can acknowledge the feeling, I am feeling a bit uncertain right now, and that is okay. And then you can breathe a single, conscious breath before you reach for your phone to check again, before you decide to send another message, before you start the cycle of self-criticism. That breath is not just air, it is a moment of space. It is the practice of setting down the needle. You are choosing to be the weaver, not the curator of an illusion. You are choosing to let the moment be what it is, rather than forcing it to look flawless, to satisfy an audience that isn't truly looking. Or consider the nights when you lie awake, the room dark, the silence heavy, and your mind begins to play back a mistake from years ago. You are trying to scrub that memory clean, trying to say the right words to a person who is no longer there, trying to fix a knot in your history that has already been pulled tight by the passage of time. You are exhausted by this labor, yet you feel that if you stop, you are somehow betraying the lessons you should have learned. But you are not being productive. You are being a prisoner to a tapestry that has already been finished. What if you allowed yourself to see that the mistake was just a part of the weave? A place where the thread snapped and you had to tie a knot to keep going, and that you are allowed to stop trying to hide that knot from yourself. You do not need to be the person you were when you made that error. You have grown and you have changed. You are allowed to forgive yourself for not knowing then what you know now. Forgiveness is not a grand, singular event. It is the quiet, repeated act of letting go of the needle you are using to poke at your own history. Every time you notice the memory and choose not to follow it into the maze of shame, you are practicing the wisdom of the mountain weaver. You are accepting that the pattern is what it is, and you are no longer obligated to repeat the same struggle. And what of the times when you are exhausted, yet you feel guilty for resting? We live in a culture that treats productivity as a form of moral goodness, and for many of us, the idea of doing nothing feels like a failure of character. We smile through the day, performing the role of the capable, collected and thriving person, while inside we are flickering like a candle in a windstorm. We are afraid that if we stop the performance, if we drop the mask, we will be seen as empty or weak. But remember Kale. His strength was not in his ability to produce flawless silk. It was in his willingness to accept that his own history knots and all was the foundation of his work. Your worth is not tied to your output. You do not need to earn your right to breathe, to exist, or to rest. When you feel that guilt rising, look at it with the same curiosity you would bring to a stranger sitting on a park bench. Oh, there is that old story again. The one that says, I am not enough unless I am producing. You don't have to believe the story. You don't have to argue with it. You can just let it sit there like a shadow, while you give yourself the permission to be still. Resting is not a reward for a hard day's work. It is a fundamental need of a human being. It is the way you nourish the soil of your own life, so that whatever is meant to grow can find its own time to bloom. This is the beauty of the middle way. You can care about your relationships, your work, and your dreams without gripping them until they suffocate. You can be disciplined without being a tyrant to yourself. You can set goals without making your happiness dependent on their achievement. When you begin to move through the day with this awareness, something subtle shifts. The world doesn't necessarily get easier, but you get steadier. You find that you have a bit more room to breathe in the middle of a conflict, a bit more patience when things go wrong, a bit more grace when you inevitably stumble. You might be worried that if you become this soft, you will lose your edge, or you will be walked over, or you will lose your drive. But notice the people who truly embody this kind of peace. They are not passive, they are responsive. They are not weak, they are resilient. Because they are not wasting their energy fighting their own inner experience. They have so much more to give to the world. When they face a challenge, they don't add the second wound of self-judgment. They meet the situation clearly, they take the next right step, and they move on. This is the path of the mountain temple, the way of the weaver, and the secret of the woven rug. It is the art of being fully present, fully human, and fully at peace with the reality of your life, even especially when it feels like a tangled mess. You are doing the work simply by noticing when you are gripping, and by choosing, with infinite gentleness, to open your hand. You are becoming the weaver who appreciates the strength of the foundation, rather than the performer who is terrified of the underside. And as you continue to practice this in the small, seemingly insignificant moments of your day, you will find that the peace you were looking for was never a prize to be won. It was the space you were always inhabiting, just waiting for you to realize you were already home. In a little while, we will let all of this dissolve completely. We will set down the metaphors and the stories and the teachings, and we will allow the mind to simply rest in the vast, quiet space that remains. There is nothing left for you to manage. The needle is on the floor. The threads are resting. And you, dear friend, are finally ready to drift into the deep, restorative dark. The needle has been laid to rest on the weathered, loom room floor, and the mountain air has grown still, carrying only the scent of wet pine and the hushed rhythm of the rising mist. The frantic, unseen work of your day has ceased. The audience you were performing for has vanished into the shadows, leaving behind a silence that is no longer demanding or critical, but spacious and kind. You have spent so much of your life trying to present a seamless pattern to the world, terrified that a single loose thread might reveal the history of your struggle, that you may have forgotten the profound relief of simply being a person who is still weaving, still learning, and still becoming. Feel the heavy, velvet weight of the night pressing gently against the windows. Your body is becoming like the mountains themselves, grounded, immovable, and entirely content to exist in the dark. The hands that spent so many hours clutching at the frayed edges of your own history are finally opening, the fingers softening, the tension dissolving into the mattress. Your chest, once tight with the need to hold up a perfect surface, is sinking into the warmth of the bed, each breath a quiet, rhythmic release. Even your mind, which has raced through 1,000 rehearsals of who you should be and how you should be seen, is slowing its pace, heartbeat by heartbeat, into the quiet, unadorned truth of just being present. There is a pale silver light filtering in from the moon, casting a soft, gentle glow over the room. It does not demand that the rug be flawless. It does not measure the knots in your history. It does not ask for a performance of competence. It simply is, and in that simple, quiet existence, it invites you to do the same. You are like that tapestry, woven with moments of strength and moments of fraying, held together not by the perfection of the surface, but by the resilience of the threads that kept you through the blizzard. You are real, even when you are not being witnessed. You are enough, even when your pattern is still incomplete. You are whole, even when the knots are visible to your own eyes. Let the final traces of your effort dissolve. The knots that felt like heavy burdens during the light of the afternoon are now just soft, textured memories in the background of your awareness. You don't have to carry them into the dream. You don't have to resolve them or analyze them or fix them. They are part of the weave, but they do not define the weaver. The performance is over. The loom is silent. There's no one left to please. And that finally is the most profound freedom of all. You are not a masterpiece that must be displayed to be valuable. You are the space in which the life flows. Feel your breath becoming quieter, shallower, a soft, internal tide that doesn't need to be guided. It just moves. It just exists. You are drifting into a place where the boundaries between your own heart and the stillness of the world are beginning to blur. You are safe. You are held by the gravity of the earth, a force that never forgets its duty, a force that asks for no validation. Let yourself lean into that support. Let yourself be completely, unreservedly unobserved. In the dark, there is no need to be anything other than exactly who you are in this single fleeting, beautiful moment of rest. The lessons of the high mountain pass, the wisdom of the merchant's rug, the truth of the knotted foundation, all of this is settling into the marrow of your bones, not as a weight, but as a soft, reassuring presence. You don't have to remember the stories. You don't have to hold on to the teachings. The truth is already part of you, a deep resonant chord that continues to vibrate long after the needle has been set down. You are returning home, not to a place you have to travel to, but to the quiet, unadorned center of your own being that was here before the performance began, and will be here long after the pattern is finished. There is no more to be done tonight. The threads are resting. The room is quiet. You have set down the heavy burden of your own expectations. And for the first time in a long time, the path ahead is quiet, dark, and entirely your own to inhabit. The village is asleep. The mountain is silent. The world is asking nothing of you but that you finally, completely let go. Drift now into the vast, silent space that is waiting for you. A space that is not a void, but a home. You have stepped away from the loom, and you are finally safe to close your eyes. What if the flaw you were trying so desperately to hide was, all along, the very thread that held the beauty of your story together?